Grotting, okay. I'm going to introduce Jan White. Jan is the daughter of the late Stan White, who was the person who flew out from England to Australia in the Gypsy Moth we know today as ZK-80T. Stan was well known in aviation circles in Hawke's Bay, and he's always known as the unsung hero or the quiet gentleman of aviation. So, Jan, Stan's full name was Stanley Gordon, and I noticed that in the register I've got, they have him designated as flying officer at the time he bought the Gypsy Moth. Was he interested in doing a short-term commission with the RAF?
Oh yes, he had been over to England and had been accepted for the RAF and had done a short stint over there and decided that it wasn't really for him, the short-term commission in England. They didn't send him to India or Africa where he really wanted to go. They had some very strange idea that his eyesight wasn't up to it. Well, that's disproven many years later, but however he decided that flying around England in open old cockpits for 5 years wasn't really for him. So he decided to resign after not a very long time in the RAF.
Well, thanks, Jan, because it was quite common for a lot of New Zealanders to go to UK and get short-term commissions. Two that come to mind are Pat Monkton from Waipukurau, and also Sir James Roberts, who actually ended up as being the chairman of Air New Zealand. They were both the short-term commissions, and they went to the Khyber Pass and to Iraq. Where did your father start to learn to fly?
At Bridgepower. Well, not Bridgepower, it was the old airfield at Longlands.
All right.
He used to cycle out there. He could fly an aeroplane, had a licence for an aeroplane before he had a car licence. So he used to cycle out on the old gravel road. Yeah.
Now, not many people would know where the old airfield was at Longlands. It's only in recent years that the old hangar actually was demolished.
Yeah, I was hoping you wouldn't ask me that, Ian, because I haven't quite.
Well, I know where it is.
Oh.
I know where it is, yes. It's just before you come to the Pakipak turn, that the road turns to the right by the Pakipak School. Mm-hmm. It was about half a kilometre down the road, and there's still one old shed there. They were old reed sheds, and I used to think, now how on earth did they fit aircraft into it? Because forgot that the Gypsy Moths, the wings fold and they could put them side by side. But that's where it was. And there's a new tin shed on the site. So next time you drive past, look at the tin shed and you'll see it. Right, and then the Aero Club moved to Bridgepower, and of course it's been there ever since. And your father went and kept his hours up, and he went off to do his big OE, and that's when he bought one Gypsy Moth.
Yes, having decided that the RAF wasn't quite what he hoped it would be. And so he bought the Gypsy Moth from Brian Lewis and Co.
Yes, well, it says that, according to my records, it's a Gypsy G Moth. That means it's wooden construction, and its serial number is 11101, and it was one of the last to be constructed at Staglang before de Havilland moved to Hatfield.
Well, I think you've done your homework pretty well.
Right. Dad decided he's going to fly it out to New Zealand. Would you like to tell us where he took off from? It just says an RAF airfield. Do you know which airfield he took off from?
Was it Hendon or Heston? Heston.
Heston.
Yeah. Well, actually, I'll just say that he bought the aeroplane on Black Friday. So in our family, we've never had a problem with Friday the 13th because it didn't seem to do him any harm.
Right.
But he left Heston on the 18th of September. And took him around about 6 weeks. When did he arrive back in October? End of October.
That's right, it took him, yes. I actually think if you look at the time that the aircraft arrived back in New Zealand, it was about 8 weeks lapse time all round.
Yeah, because the first stop was in Paris and they took his logbook away because it was bad weather. And I don't think he would have been silly enough to have carried on in the fog, but that's what they did over there. And then he had 10 days down with malaria in Singapore. So that didn't really help. He wasn't in a hurry anyway. I think initially he thought he'd probably get as far as India and end up bringing it in a box from there, but I don't think he was too concerned about what might have happened. But anyway, he got held up in a few places, but that was okay. He made it in the end.
He made a reference in one of the articles I read about him that the metal propeller that he had on gave him extra 10 knots. Have you still got the propeller?
Yes.
You have?
Yes.
Right.
I think I'm probably the only girl with a metal propeller in a corner, sort of stacked up in the sitting room in a corner. Sort of
And was that a ferry propeller?
Ferry reed, yeah.
Ferry, yes, okay. He also had a spare propeller with him, didn't he?
Yes.
And thereby hangs the tail too.
Yes, it does. And funnily enough, last night I found the receipt from the company he bought it from, and he ordered a spare propeller for his particular aeroplane, a wooden one, which he had strapped to the side, which dutifully came with him all the way, and Air Department wouldn't let him use the metal one when he got back because it was very heavy and probably cracked the crankshaft, which he said would have probably been correct. So he went to put the wooden prop on and found the bolt holes weren't quite the right size. So it's what you call false feeling of false, what do you call it?
Well, it's false insecurity, isn't it?
Security, yeah, when you think
that's
you've
right,
paid your insurance and you haven't really.
Yes, so thereby the 13th still holds good for your family,
Yeah.
doesn't it? Yes.
He didn't like that story to be told much though, because he thought it would reflect badly on his organisation. Really, it was nothing to do with him.
No, Oh. And Jan, how long did Dad keep the aircraft?
Was when the war started. It was impressed. Well, there seemed to be various arguments as to whether it was impressed or not. That's what he told me anyway. And I found last night that he got £195 for it.
All right. Well, because according to the register I've been through, it originally was registered as G, which is Great Britain, AAJO, and when it came to New Zealand, of course, it was changed to ADT, and we all know it as ADT. The register says that he bought it in England. It was sold abroad to him, so he flew it out. Then it was sold to Airwork New Zealand Limited, and then it went on to Union Airways, and Union Airways used it as a liaison and training aircraft up until NAC took over in 1947, and they had it for some time, and then it was sold on to a Mr. Barker, a Mr. Alexander, and then to a Mr. Hall in Wairoa. And I can remember Mr. Hall flying the aircraft from Wairoa, because it was strange that both Gypsy Moths were in Wairoa, AEJ and ADT. And so you could say they're stablemates. And I was telling Jan that there used to be two little car shed type hangars on the western side of the old Wairoa airfield. And you made the comment they must have been awfully wet, because Wairoa used to get waterlogged quite frequently, didn't it? Yes.
Yes,
Right.
did.
And then, of course, it went on to Mr. Alexander again and some others, and now it's with Mr. Middleton.
Yes.
Yes.
He's made a
And
lovely
you've seen
job.
it recently.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, and we're in contact.
Yes. I said to Jan, it's a pity that no one has thought to put the turtle back on it, because it actually had a headrest and the turtle back ran right down to the rudder. But talking to Jan, apparently it's very hard to construct. And I wondered whether it was in metal rather than in wood.
Yeah.
I can't remember. I've never seen an aircraft with one, so I can't make any comment, because all the times that I've known ADT, that has been missing.
Yes, it's had
Good.
various. Just I thought I might mention, Ian, that the aeroplane before Dad got it had the most incredible career. It had flown around Africa and India and China and all sorts of places and Europe, of course,
Yes.
before he even bought it. So it certainly knew its way around the world.
When was it constructed then? I mean, he bought it in 34.
Yeah, 1929.
1929. So it's a very old machine, and therefore must be one of the earliest Gypsy Moths still surviving.
I wouldn't like to say really, because there's so many in England that are still around. And I don't know the history of them.
Well, the Tiger Club.
It's the ACDC. Oh no, that's a tiger.
It's a tiger.
Tiger,
AC is
yeah.
a tiger. And of course, there are various gypsy moths coming back into the air after restoration. But yeah, and it's strange that of all the wooden moths that were in New Zealand prior to the war, ADT is the only one that survives. AEJ, of course, is different because it's a metal moth. Yeah. So
It's a bit like Hannibal's axe, I think.
yes. The other interesting thing is that Ron Kippenberger, that used to be in CAA, always said that the wooden moth was far more forgiving than the metal moth.
Ah.
So that's interesting, isn't it?
I mean, it felt. I won't say that.
Because he asked me if any survived, and none of them survived the war. They were all either given to ATCs or broken up.
So here's Karachi, Baghdad.
Karachi, Baghdad, yes.
In 32.
So, I mean, it voyaged great distances long before Dad got it.
Amazing, Cairo.
Yes.
That's one of the, I said to Dad, God, it knew its way around. He said, yes, that's one of the reasons he
bought it.
he liked it.
Well, see, there we are, Tobruk.
Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing.
That's
Really is amazing. And look at the wonderful Tripoli, all these seals that Weir has been given approval.
Tunisia,
So,
Algeria.
Jan, why wasn't he allowed to fly the Tasman?
Nobody had at that stage, I don't think.
Well, yes, I mean, but they were bigger aircraft, not lighter aircraft, of course.
Yeah, I don't think anyone had,
no.
in such an
Yes.
aircraft.
The first light aircraft would have come over would have been Menzies in the Southern Cross
Avian,
Junior.
was it?
Yeah, the Avian Southern Cross Junior, and that would have been the smallest aircraft to that time to come over.
I think by that stage he was probably quite happy to put it on a boat.
And bring it home. Yes.
Because with two compasses, you know,
Yeah,
I
that's
suppose he was just in awe of people like Chichester and sailors who could take star shots and things
Yes,
like that. He
that's
just
right.
had no idea how they were able to do that on moving platforms and what have you.
And Jan, I believe your father was interested in forming an air freight company at one stage too.
I'm not sure whether it was an air freight company, but I think he and two friends had set up a company actually for, there was an engineer, Dad was being the pilot, and the other friend was a investor who was interested, and I think they were going to service and sell aircraft.
Okay. And then the war came and
Then
it
the war came, yeah.
fell over, yes. And did your father maintain his interest in aviation right through?
What, after the war?
Yeah, after the war.
I think his last entry was about 49. Then I think he had to get serious and think about, I think he'd probably spent rather a lot of, all his money probably by then on.
Yes.
So he had to settle down and get into farming.
And you were telling me you took him for a flight not long after you got your licence.
Yes, he was rather terrified and pretty happy to be back on the ground, I think. And I don't think he thought it was natural for girls, especially daughters, to be flying around.
Oh, well.
I think he was secretly quite proud.
Yes, but he wouldn't say so.
No, and I couldn't get him up in the Tiger ever. He had every imaginable excuse. So it was a pity because I wanted to pick his brains. But
yes, but he wouldn't let you.
No, he always sidestepped the issue.
All right, yes. But his interest was still there right to the time he died?
Oh, yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
We had some great conversations
yes.
about flying.
Yes.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I could have thought now of a lot more questions to ask him about his trip, but and I probably would have recorded some things too secretly because he hated the idea of any tapes or anything like that. But I think I would have jacked something up and given him a couple of whiskies, and that would have helped.
Yeah. It is sad because when you think, and I alluded to this earlier, that he is the unsung hero, because I mean Gene Batten got all the publicity and things like that, and there was Stan just quietly buzzing along at about 90 knots, and he's
87 miles an hour. I think
87 miles an
the
hour.
big prop increased his speed too.
Okay, in the Gypsy, and yet there's no real record of it, is there?
Well, he wasn't chasing records or anything like that.
But I mean record as.
I see what you mean. Yeah, but he wasn't looking for any limelight or anything.
No.
It was a lovely story. He said that when he was at in Sydney, Mascot, I think it was, the King's Cup Air Race, some of the competitors had just flown in, so there was a fair bit of hullabaloo. And a young Aussie reporter came around and said, oh mate, just wondered if you could help me. Apparently there's some young guy that's flown out from England in a gypsy moth, and I just wondered if you knew anything about it. And Dad said, oh, no, sonny, sorry, I wouldn't have a clue, with a G registration that he was standing beside. And
Yes, yes. That was me, the McRobertson Air Race.
Yeah,
Air Race. Yeah, that's right. All right. And of course, that was where the Scott and Black came through in the Comet 88. Yes.
And Parmentier and Mole came second in the DC-2.
That's right.
Commercial airliner.
That's right.
He was invited to their party at the Wentworth.
Oh, was he? Oh, good. Now, Jan, when you gave Vintage Aviation the Sudcott flying seat that your father wore, I found this in a pocket. And this is an account or directions when he flew a Blackburn Baffin, and the number was 156, and we've since looked in the his logbook, and he flew that machine quite often. And he was obviously going out on a patrol, and on it it's got the track that he was to fly, and the purpose of the mission was to look for shipping and report in. The height was 4,500 feet.
Heavens.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't think they could
The
see.
speed was 85 knots. And then the reference point they give is Cape Campbell, the Brothers, Karori Rock, and Lake, no, I can't quite read this, Turahina Head. So, in other words, he went from Rongotai to Cape Campbell to the Brothers to Karori Rock, and then landed back at Rongotai.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a little interest, and it would be sometime, if you look it up, be interested to see how long the flight took, because they got airborne at 16:10, which is 10 past 4 in the afternoon. So we don't know what date it was, because it doesn't appear on there, but yeah,
Might match up with something in the logbook though,
but
with
that
those
just-
details.
You just tacked away, because that's actually the message form. So they, a true aviator, they grab what's available, right in the back of it, and off they go. So you've seen ADT, and what colour scheme is it in now?
Red fuse and silver wings. It just looks magnificent.
Red, yes, and that's how I can remember it as a child. Red fuselage and silver wings, yes. And Jan, you were saying that it's had doors fitted to it. Or
No.
They've been taken out.
Taken out.
Taken out, yes, because the original Gypsy Moth did not have doors like a Tiger Moth, and because part of the structure was to leave the doors in, and you had to climb over the top, didn't you?
That's right. And
Yes.
you get into this like getting on a horse.
Like getting a horse.
So it was.
Oh, well.
It's quite an interesting little
Well, you
exercise.
used to be a rider in your younger days, didn't you?
Oh, I still do a bit of riding.
Oh, good.
Occasionally.
So
There we go.
There it is. Oh, yes. That's very nice indeed. Now I might just hold that round. There it is. There's ADT, and we'll just bring it up so they get it into focus. And that's the aircraft as it looks now. I think it's always had that colour, hasn't it, Jean? When your dad had it, it's a dark colour, so it could have been slightly darker red.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yes.
I wasn't around in those days.
I know you weren't around those days, but I'm just looking
Yeah,
at
no, I
the...
know.
yes,
And of course,
thank you.
any coloured photos were coloured photos.
Yes.
They weren't.
Yes, they were hand-coloured.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, but it looks magnificent, doesn't it? Yes,
No, it looks great. And
yes.
hopefully it'll be on the rally next year. So
All right.
we've got our fingers crossed.
Now, which way has he put the exhaust?
Oh, that goes all the way down.
All the ways down.
All the way down the side.
Yeah, oh, down the side. That's right. Yes, there's one over there.
On the starboard
Yes, because
side.
some of them had what they called a pepper pot.
On the port side of it.
Yes, exhaust. You had to be very careful when you put your hand out on a gypsy, because if you put your hand out the port side, you get a little bit of a burn.
Well, it's sort of what you call form of heating.
Yes, that's right. Form of heating. Right. Anything else you want to say about your dad, Jen?
Well, it just... When I first heard about this trip, or learnt about it, I didn't regard it very much, because he was just my dad. And I mean, it was, he seemed he was a very good dad, but he seemed a fairly unremarkable sort of a chap. And then when I learnt to fly, I thought, oh, hang on, this is something pretty special. And then when I started flying Tiger Moths, I realised the magnitude of the trip, and just had no idea how somebody just so sort of, I don't know, unassuming was able to do such a thing. And I don't know, I'm just totally amazed, really. I did say to Dad once, well, did many people do it? And he said, oh yes, he said 4 people had done it by themselves before I had. He said, by themselves. He said lots of people started and ended up either elsewhere or in a heap or didn't actually make it. But I don't know, I think it was a time when so many pioneering things were done and people... And I said to him once, do you know, I think the best thing that probably ever happened to you was there was no one there to tell you no, you couldn't do it.
Yes, yes.
Doesn't detract from the magnitude of what he did.
Oh, no, of course it doesn't, no. When you think what Chichester did, I mean, he flew a gypsy moth on floats across the Tasman. He came to grief in Norfolk and had to virtually rebuild the aircraft. And then he took it all the way up to Japan and finally crashed it. And then, I mean, the first crossing of a light aircraft we can think of was Menzies bringing over the Avian. Gene Batten brought the the Gull 6 over, and that's the one that now rests at Auckland International Airport. Then the war came, and the first one after the war, of course, was the chap that flew out in the Aerocoup, Newton, the chap Newton, that flew out in the Aerocoup from Belgium to New Zealand, and that was on 90 horsepower.
Well, I think there was a chap from Christchurch, Oscar Garden. I think he made the same trip as well. I'm not quite sure when. He was a bit like Dad, I think, and just kept his own company and didn't say a lot.
Because that's never been recorded anywhere. I was just going quickly, and then you had Phil Lightband and co that flew the Proctor out. They flew
quite a few people did that.
Yes, they put a Proctor out, and then Arthur Bradshaw, of course, brought the Proctor 5 across, and he did that direct, non-stop, by fitting a huge tank under the belly of the Proctor between the wings. And there's only one photograph I've ever seen of the tank there, because once he got to New Zealand he ditched it.
Yeah.
But it's quite a feat.
I don't know if you'd like me to relate just one or two of the little things. He landed at a place called Montélimar in France, and for anyone who knows France, a lot of the villages have streets with walls and you can't sort of see behind the walls, and anyway, he was walking down the street and he said it was in the evening, but it prematurely went dark. He said it just went all dark. He looked up and here was the Graf Zeppelin had gone overhead, directly overhead the street, and it blocked out the sun down that alleyway, if you like, down that street. And he said it was uncanny, absolute chance in a million.
Right.
Remember him telling me that story. And I know his, the Bête Noire, of course, was the Timor Sea, and I think he had a cylinder change before then, and once he was 5 hours out of sight of land, and I think it was like a 7.5 hour crossing, and he had 2 compasses only for navigation, and the compasses weren't corresponding with one another going across the Timor. So he took a view on, I'm not quite sure how he worked out which was probably the correct one, and then he made a few corrections. 20 minutes this way, 10 minutes that way, 20 minutes this way, 10 minutes that way. I don't know how you keep you cool in such conditions with no point of reference, but anyway, he managed to get to Darwin, and where he was charged excise on the fuel that he had, the remaining fuel he had in the tank. He said that was the one tax he never did mind paying. But I think he was pretty lucky to actually make it. And I asked him what height he would fly at over the sea, and he said, probably not much more than 1,500 feet, because then you could read the ripples on the waves to see the drift.
Right.
And going high wasn't really, apart from fuel, I suppose, fuel economy, it wasn't going to achieve anything else.
Now, Jan, did he have, I seem to think that he lined up to land in a field once, and he came down and it wasn't the correct airfield, the next east.
That's right, he was heading for Rangoon, I think. Anyway, somewhere over there, and I don't know, the map wasn't working out too well, and he just couldn't find this field anywhere, and he saw a bare piece of land, so he thought, well, it's the only one around. He set up to land there, and the last minute he saw sort of a log sticking out, so he said he pulled away, and if it hadn't have had that great big prop on, he never would have got out of there. And it was getting near the end of the day, and there was this range of hills and this totally strange countryside, and all he could do was hope that the light let him get over this range of hills, a bit like the Tomato Peak range. And over there was this huge, great big airfield, Air Force airfield. So obviously he put down there, and later on he was in contact with the AA, who provided all the maps, and they wrote to him and congratulated him on his successful conclusion, and he wrote back thanking them for all their help and one thing and another, and just mentioned in passing that perhaps they might correct the placement of this airfield. And then there's another letter, and I've got them all here, that they're very apologetic and hoped that it hadn't inconvenienced him too much. And apparently he found out there were tigers in this sort of area around where he nearly landed.
Yes.
So there were a few sort of little interesting moments, which I'm sure you could expect in a trip that long.
It's interesting he left Heston. Not many people know where Heston is because it's now no longer an airfield. It was built over, but it was one of the major 3 airfields for London at the time. There was Northolt, which is still in existence, which is
That's a
RAF,
big, big
RAF,
base.
yes, Croydon and Heston. And Heston was where later that Sidney Cotton, who became the father of photo reconnaissance, where he used to operate his 12A out of, and he
Hence
used to
the
take.
syndicate suits as
That's
well.
right. That's right. That's the man, and he was an Australian, and he used to fly this 12A out, take off at daybreak and come back at nightfall, so no one knew that he was on clandestine operations over Germany, and he had fitted these Leica cameras to his aircraft behind secret panels, and he used to go out and photograph the whole of the continent and then come back and they'd process the film. So Heston was quite an amazing airfield. At the same time that your father was there and Sidney Cotton were flying in and out, Lufthansa were also flying in and out on regular services.
Oh, right.
So it was a major airfield for London. But as I said today, nothing exists of it. So
I think his longest flight was 9 hours 25 minutes. Well, not as it's in a day, and I just cannot imagine in an open cockpit flying, lengths like that. I mean, 5 hours or 6 hours, and you're pretty whacked. Over country, but over country you don't know. And
he must have had stamina.
Well,
Stamina and endurance and played doggedness.
oh, and another thing I'd like to mention too is I think he had 187 hours total time before he set off, and like 140 hours solo or something.
Gosh.
And he more than doubled his time
On the way out.
after the trip.
Gosh.
But they just...
Did you have any mechanical failures on the way out?
No, but I do note in the logbook that there was a bit of smoke, coming from one of the cylinders. I think probably they changed the rings. I changed a cylinder in India, where he got to fly in the Maharaja of Jaipur's monospar while the engineers were fixing his plane.
All right. Oh, that's interesting.
But he took a spare cylinder.
With him?
A cylinder with him.
All
I think he took pyjamas, a toothbrush, clean pair of undies, and a spare shirt. I think that was about all, because the rest was tools.